Trying to make more sense of your family business? Let's talk about it.
Welcome to another episode of Making Sense of Family Business. I'm John Kemfield, the Family Business Solutionist, broadcasting from Melbourne in Australia. Today I'm talking about avoidance, denial, and a slow poisoning. Sounds like a stage play. The difference between success and failure for family businesses is often to be found in how they've managed their risks of conflict. Because families and business don't naturally go together, but they do naturally end up in conflict, some or many times over the years. So this series of videos is designed to help you make more sense of family business by gaining a better understanding of the causes of conflict and by giving some ideas of how to prevent conflict arising and dealing with it once it's actually there. In the end, we want to help you avoid your family business getting stuck and perhaps getting into trouble. So if this is of interest, let's get into it. It's a truism that most business families and the businesses that they run don't typically follow the playbook from the Harvard School of Business. They are a mixture of history, charisma, values, brute force of the founder, the whole family ethos makes each one of them unique, although clearly you're talking about a family that's in business, there are going to be a lot of similarities between one and the next. The point is that most of them are far less formal in the way they operate, even when they become very large organizations, than their corporate counterparts. And one of the things that often shocks business owners after they have sold out to private equity and then stayed on for a few years is discovering how confining the new regime is compared to when they were the only voice they had to listen to. Surprise there. What it means, though, is that family businesses can develop a culture which in some areas, particularly in the areas of relationships, will follow the path of least resistance. And that is particularly applicable when it comes to dealing with family tensions. So back to today's talk, we're talking about avoidance, denial, and a slow poisoning. One of the things that I comment on frequently is how clear it is that a family that has finally called somebody like me in to help them unpick their problems and put things back together again in a better way is that they have been avoiding and denying what is actually going on in their family, which then impacts their business, usually for many years. So what's the difference between avoidance and denial? Avoidance happens when the family member fears the consequences of dealing with the problem. So they avoid it. They can see it like an obstacle in the road, and they literally steer away from it so as not to deal with it. So they have consciously chosen to avoid dealing with the problem. That is quite different, although it often comes mixed in with denial, where we really have a form of active emotional self-protection taking place because the family members just don't want to acknowledge that there is a problem, so they rationalize it away or they minimize it to the point of triviality so they can justify not dealing with it. So both of them take some active diminution of the risk as opposed to a complete ignorance of it, but they both end up in the same place. The problems that are brewing are not dealt with, and as we well know, when you have problems, and particularly conflicts in a family, if they're not resolved, they tend to go underground and come back and bite you in the bum when you least expect it. Denial prevents families from fixing problems they should be fixing and perhaps could be fixing. So it's a sad thing that it happens, and it's very, very common. What then happens is, because the parties who are affected by the problem can see that the family or the leaders of the family or the governance bodies, if they have them, are simply not going to do what they should be doing, they then start to fixate on the little things, squeezing the toothpaste in the middle. They fixate on the little things, the little comments, the little activities, the little left outs, the little comments, and they become big things. So what should be insignificant starts to become a pebble that eventually builds into a mountain, or should we say a volcano, that is primed to erupt. We often find family members who are in this position start to invent their own truths. They find that if they can no longer believe that the family is committed to identifying what's really going on and dealing with it, they start to develop their own truth to make sense of the world. And their truths are in conflict with the rest of the family, or maybe with a parent or a sibling, and then that becomes a cause of misalignment, which then becomes a cause of conflict. We find some of the, if you like, indicators of this. You can see in language that comes up in meetings, where for no rational reason, these family members start to disagree with just about anything that anybody else says, because they are strategically in a different headspace. And they find reasons for simply blocking stuff and preventing things from proceeding that need to be proceeding. That can happen in the business, and it can happen in the family. It's a warning sign. The very fact that there is a family business sitting behind the family tends to amplify the emotional issues. So things that are a problem in the family don't get resolved. They get transferred eventually into the business becomes weaponized, the business is the scene of conflict, the family is the catalyst for that. So we have a problem because avoidance and denial leads to a slow poisoning in the family, which then leaches ultimately toxins into the family business. By that time, avoidance and denial have become cultural outcomes. The family operates on a basis of avoidance and denial, and there are these issues that are accumulating in the background. Could be any of a very wide range of them, perhaps many of a very wide range, and they are simply not being dealt with. The people affected by it, obviously, are feeling more and more unhappy. The people who are avoiding and denying double down on the avoidance and the denial and build barriers so they can somehow carry on day by day without worrying about it, until some catalyst occurs, and all of a sudden we then see enormous guilt in particularly elderly parents when they recognise they weren't there when they needed to be there, and there really are major problems in the family that they are now powerless to deal with because they have a long history of not dealing with the family's problems. So, enough of the doom and gloom. How do you prevent this from happening? It's going to be a list that's not unlike a lot of other lists for preventing conflict. The first thing is create a culture that feels safe. Enable people to speak openly and robustly about things they're not comfortable about. Get them to call out problems and get them to bring a solution with every problem they identify. But don't just leave them there, and have a culture that is more concerned about accountability than blame, that will bring problems to the fore so they can be dealt with. Seek agreements for things that are going on, for policies, for commitments, for succession plans, for inheritance, for leadership, all of these things. Attempt to get all of these things discussed, buttoned down, agreed, documented, because agreements displace assumptions. Assumptions can be developed and they can be extremely wrong and therefore extremely damaging. And that's not what we want, because it leads to a bad outcome. What we want to do is turn assumptions into agreements, and that means we have the elements of a family plan. When you have a proper family plan and when you have government systems in place that implement the family plan, there is far less opportunity for avoidance and denial, because it gets called out as a blocker for achieving the goals in the family plan. Now, to do that, you can't just leave it to chance. You need to establish governance structures and systems. The governance structure for a family is usually a family council, which acts like a board of directors for the family, making major decisions, setting policies, creating directions, and enforcing the family's values and the family rulebook, if you like, which it, of course, is responsible for creating. So the family council is the structure, the family policies, the family constitution, the family rulebook, the code of conduct, all of those things. They are the systems that lay out, this is how to do this stuff, this is why we're doing it this way, here are the consequences, here are the expected outcomes, this is how we work. It's an example of how a business family needs to professionalise, not corporatise, but professionalise its operations, because it is connected to a family business. Commence educating your children when they are young. Try to make sure that your children develop emotional intelligence and empathy. When a family business has been founded and driven by a rampant entrepreneur, there's often not a lot of space in their life for empathy, for taking the time to connect with other people. They're so busy moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, they just draw everybody along in their comet trail by sheer gravitational force. Once things start to move beyond the point where the founder can carry and motivate everything on their own efforts, we need to bring people with us, and it's a lot better having people liking us, working with us, sharing our aspirations, than it is trying to whip them into line. That kind of went out of date a few years ago. So we want to bring up a generation of people, and we want to embed in our culture the sort of emotional intelligence and empathy that every value statement says we've got, but a great many cultures, when they are properly unpacked, say, yeah, we say it, but we don't really do it, because that's what culture is all about. It's very important in this space to have role clarity. If we know exactly what people's roles are in the family, and also in the business, but we're talking about the family, if we know what the roles are, we know what the responsibilities are, we know what the authority is, we know what the accountabilities are, there is far less room for doubt, far less capability to avoid and deny issues, because they are often in a business family to do with identity, status, position, family hierarchy, plans for the future, all of that sort of stuff. And I guess finally, it's useful if the family adopts a proactive attitude towards running as a business family, as opposed to being reactive and simply getting on with the business and then dealing with problems in the family as and when they arise, reacting to them. And part and parcel of that is often bringing in advisors, setting up advisory boards, things of that sort, getting outside of the bubble of the family in the business by bringing independent, experienced people in and using them as architects to build for the future, rather than as firefighters to put out the blazes that have been created by the avoidance and the denials that have led to the poisoning, which have led to the bushfires. Now, if you found this useful, please give us a like and come back next week for the next thrilling episode. And if you know anybody else who you think might benefit from some of these insights into making sense of family business, please let them know about these videos, and there's a series of podcasts behind them. We'd love to bring them on board as well. For now, from me, John Kenfield, thanks for watching.